I want to welcome everybody to tonight's program. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Dr. Jason Bant. I'm the Extension Beef Cattle Specialist stationed at Overton. Tonight's topic is head gates, squeeze chutes, and calf table considerations. So if you're thinking about purchasing a new one, if you don't have one, if you're thinking about replacing one, or if you're trying to make the decision of you have one, but it's not quite working up to the way you would like, is it worth going ahead and spending some money and getting a new one at this point in time? So we'll spend some time talking about some of those considerations tonight. All right, before we get started, since we are going to end up talking about products and brand names tonight, I need to go ahead and get my disclaimer out of the way. We are going to talk about specific brands and items or accessories. Just need to make it clear that if I leave something out, not trying to discriminate against any companies or products out there, and any that we have included, we're not endorsing those as Texas A&M AgriLife Extension. There's only a partial listing of available products, features, and accessories. So especially if you're looking at making a purchase, make sure you talk to the company and see if there's any additional features or accessories that you may want to add if you're looking at purchasing a squeeze chute or calf table. So to start with, kind of wanted to talk about some terminology just to make sure we're all on the same page. I'm going to talk about a head gate. And yes, from some companies, you can buy an individual head gate by itself. And so that'd be on the top left-hand corner of your slide. Squeeze chute is what most people are familiar with. And some people may just call this a chute, a working chute, or a squeeze chute. I'll typically say squeeze chute or chute tonight throughout our presentation. And then a calf table there on the top right-hand corner of the slide. So we'll start with a little discussion on if you just are starting with the head gate, and from a cost standpoint, that would be kind of the cheapest. And if you're looking at, well, I'm not ready to purchase all these, but I do need something to kind of help my operation, a head gate may be a place to start. Then the squeeze chute would be next. And then the calf table, I would kind of put third on the list. I will tell you, for a lot of people, you're going to end up purchasing a squeeze chute at some point in time. So you may just go ahead and do that initially and don't mess with just buying a head gate by itself. But maybe there's a situation where you have the squeeze chute at your main property and working facilities, but you have some leased properties or some additional property somewhere else where you don't necessarily want to have a squeeze chute there from a cost standpoint, but you do want to have a way to restrain cattle if you need to treat one or something, and maybe just a head gate at that location may fit your scenario. The other thing is realize when we talk about squeeze chutes, there's both manual and hydraulic options. Obviously, with the hydraulic option, we're talking a little bit more cost there. Tonight's program, we're really going to focus on manual squeeze chutes and some of the different features. But for some people, a hydraulic squeeze chute would fit them better. And so that's something, as you're making the decision, I would encourage you to look into as well. Depending on the number of cattle you're running, it may be more difficult to justify that cost of that hydraulic chute, but it is something to at least consider. So I wanted to take a few minutes here to talk about what are some factors that we would want to think about as we're making decisions on what to purchase. And so I'm going to go through several of these here to hopefully get you thinking. As we look at some of them tonight, you're kind of thinking about some of these different considerations. So one is, how well made is that squeeze chute or calf table? How long is it going to last? And I will tell you, there are some that are a little cheaper out there that may not last as long, so be aware of that. But then on the other side of that, just because you spend more money doesn't mean it's going to last longer. So really look at it close and make an estimate of how long you think it's going to last, or maybe talk to some people who already own that brand and see how well it's holding up for them. How many working parts does it have? The more working parts it has, in my thought process, the more things that can go wrong. And so that's something to keep in mind. How easy is the chute or the calf table to use now? And then as you get older, as we get older, is that going to change? And so that's something to keep in mind. Are there any physical considerations of the operator to be considered? So does somebody have a back issue? If you do have some severe back issues, that may be a big plus for purchasing a hydraulic squeeze chute or a hydraulic calf table versus a manual one. What's the height of the people that are going to be using it? Are they all of similar height, or do you have people of varying heights? And if we're talking about people who may not be as tall, are they going to be able to easily reach all the different handles or levers they need to? What's the physical strength of the person? And that can come into play with some of these manual chutes as far as how easy or hard they are to close or open. And then what's the weight of the person? And really kind of thinking about from there a calf table. Some of the calf tables require quite a bit more weight and quite a bit more leverage to flip. So we have to think about that. And when we get to the calf tables, we'll talk about some more specific considerations for them as well. Is portability important so that that chute can be moved between multiple locations? Is the chute big enough to accommodate, bulls and larger cows? Especially when we look at some of the entry level models, they're pretty small and they won't hold most bulls and they won't hold a lot of the bigger cows either. So the last thing you want to do is buy one and then you realize 6 months or a year in that it's just not big enough for the size of animals you're trying to use it with. And so make sure you consider that at the beginning. How well does the chute restrict movement of the animals? Some do a little bit better job of holding those animals still than other ones. How much pressure is required for various releases if animals are applying pressure to that specific portion? So I'll just tell a little story here. As I was doing a demo one day on a squeeze chute I'd never used before. And, in a demo in front of everybody, something always is going to go wrong. And sure enough, like I said, I had never used that chute before and timing was a little off. And that first calf that came through there, I didn't catch the way I wanted to. And so I wanted to release that calf so we could bring it back in and run it through again. Well, the lever that needed to be pushed to release, I reached up there and pushed it, nothing happened. So I reached up there and hit it, and nothing happened. And third time, I reached up there and put as much force as I could behind it and finally got it released. And so that's something to be mindful of. A lot of the companies have made some adjustments where those releases don't get in quite the bind that they did on some of the earlier models, but some of them still have some spots where those releases can really get a lot of pressure on them and can be pretty hard to release. So that's something you want to be mindful of and ask questions about when you're looking at these different options out there. Safety considerations for the people that are using the equipment as well as the cattle. We don't want anybody to get hurt in that situation. Telling another story is I was helping the herd manager at our research location at Overton look at new chutes one day and found one online that looked pretty good. And so as I was out traveling, I found a dealer that had one. So I went and looked at it in person. As I got to looking at it in person, there were several different things I noticed on the chute that for us as a research station with several grad students and undergrad students always around, kind of became a liability for the chute, because if somebody leaned on something in the wrong spot or reached up and accidentally touched something, they could unintentionally open the side exit or open the head gate and maybe create some additional challenges. So that's something to keep in mind too, is how many people are going to be around when we're working cattle and how many different things can be open unintentionally. We have to be mindful that at some point our older chutes get where they're really beyond repair and they become safety hazards. And for both a safety standpoint as well as an enjoyment standpoint, we're much better off to go ahead and spend a little money and go ahead and purchase us something new rather than constantly trying to replace that worn out equipment. The other thing to keep in mind is resale value of quality chutes and calf tables is pretty good. So if we invest and get something that's better made and of better quality and we take care of it, if we do need to resell it later on, typically that resale value is pretty good. Animal flow condition considerations. And what I'm talking about there is how well will those cattle flow through that piece of equipment? And are there things on that equipment that make it easier or harder for those animals to flow through? And we'll talk about that when we look at some specific headgate considerations later on. What kind of access does it provide for giving injections? So can you get to the neck and safely give those injections like you need to? If you're going to be branding, what kind of access does it provide to the branding location you're going to use? How noisy is the chute? And for some people, that's more important than it is for others, but some chutes make quite a bit of noise and other chutes don't make near as much noise. That's also something to keep in mind if you're going to use a hydraulic chute, is where you're going to locate that hydraulic system so that you keep the noise down so you can talk to each other when you're working cattle. On a lot of the manual chutes, in some of the areas that make more noise, some companies have gone in there and put some rubber lining or different things to help reduce the noise in those situations. When we talk about the rear gate on that squeeze chute, how good of a job does it prevent those animals from coming forward when you don't want them to come forward? And the cattle that you're working, are they going to be mostly pole cattle or are they going to be horn cattle? And that comes into play when we're talking about that head gate and how that head gate works, and also releasing those animals at times. A lot of chutes have bells and whistles on them, and sometimes they have more bells and whistles than what we really need. So one thing you really want to think about is, will you use all those bells and whistles? And if you're going to use them, then it's probably worth the additional cost. If you're not going to use them, you may look at something where you're not paying for something that you don't need. What applications will be the chute be used for? So is it just going to be used for giving vaccines? Is it going to be used for branding? Is it going to be used for dehorning cows? Is it going to be used for palpation? Are you going to be AIing or doing ET work in that chute? And so depending on what applications you're going to be using may change some of the bells and whistles that you're going to want on that chute. How important is it to have good access to feet and legs? How often will side access be needed? And when I'm talking about side access, where we open that side and we can get in there and clip those animals or do some additional work, or maybe we are trying to get a calf to nurse a cow. And so we want some side access in that situation. Are you in a situation where you're dealing with animals that will need to be clipped for production sales, whether we're talking about registered cattle or we're talking about show calves that may need to be clipped, or show steers that need to be clipped for a production sale? When we look at all these factors, it's important to realize that a lot of these decisions are really going to come down to personal preference. The chute that may be best or the calf table that may be best for one operation may not be the best for another operation. So it's important to think about how you're going to use it, what you really need on that particular piece of equipment, and find one that fits your needs and your personal preference. So when we talk about head gates, this is a setup where we just have the head gate here, and then we have some portable panels that have been used to make an alley. And we don't have a full squeeze chute, but we do have a head gate where we can catch that animal's head. We can vaccinate them if we need to. We can treat them with an antibiotic if we need to. We can put an ear tag in. We can take an ear tag out. Now, obviously, if we're given any kind of injection, we're talking about going through a portable panel here. That's not necessarily designed for that. So we have to be mindful of that, because that is a bit of a safety risk there, that if that animal jumps and you have your arm in the wrong place, it may cause a little discomfort there. In worst case scenario, you could break an arm. Now, if you are mindful there, we can make that work and not have the full investment of a squeeze chute in that situation. But that's how we would talk about setting up if we were just dealing with just a head gate attached to typically portable panels. We'll do that a lot of times in demos when you look at some of these various trade shows like NCBA or Texas and Southwestern Cattle Raisers Association. Sometimes they'll put a squeeze chute up there, but sometimes it may just be a head gate set up. Now, one thing to be mindful of if you're just thinking about using just a head gate with portable panels, you don't want to attach it just to portable panels by itself. The companies that have kind of designed their head gates to be a standalone feature like this will typically have some kind of system to attach it to. So this happens to be the preferred setup. So this head gate would actually attach to this head gate stand here, so that when that animal's caught in the head gate, their front feet are holding this down. And so their body weight is help keeping everything in place. And then when we have 4 portable panels here and 2 alley frames, that adds additional weight and stability. But the important part is this stand where those cattle are going to be standing on to help keep everything in place. But that would be kind of that setup and kind of an introductory deal if you're just looking at a head gate only, or you want something at those locations, those extra locations you have where you don't want to keep a squeeze chute there all the time. I'm going to spend the next 20 minutes or so here talking about squeeze chutes and the head gates that would go on these squeeze chutes. But first, I want to talk about types of head gates. And these categories are just kind of my description. There's not an official industry standard out there as far as classifying them this way, but this is the way we typically think about them. So when I think about head gates, I'm thinking about do they move side to side, meaning just back and forth like this? So if we look at the preferred, that's what I would consider a side to side one. So in the closed position, in the wide open position, it's just moving back and forth side to side. The next type is what I would talk about an in or out or a saloon door. So when it's closed, it looks just like the preferred, but to open it, it either is going to move in or it's going to move out. This is what a lot of people would think about a WW. Other companies use that feature as well. So this would be closed. This would be one of the older WWs where when it's open, this would be open to either catch that animal or potentially let that animal out there. Now, one thing to be mindful of is, do you need to use more than one lever or more than one handhold when you're letting an animal out in this situation? So with the preferred one, to catch or let them out, all you're using is this one handle there. You lift the handle up to open it up, that lets the animal out. You pull the handle down to close it, that catches the animal. With the saloon door or the in and out style, depending on how it's set, you may have to use one lever to release it when you get ready to turn it in to catch that animal. So like we are right here, we may have to use the lever to turn it in depending on how we have it set, may or may not. And then you have a handhold here that you grab it, and as that cow comes forward, you pull it and you catch that animal. Definitely when you get ready to let them out, you're going to need to use 2 hands there. One is going to be your release. So on this Pearson here, that release is up top here. So you're going to grab the release, you'll grab the handhold to catch, you'll open the release, and then you'll open that head gate either forward or backwards. Backward is ideal, so it sets you up for the next animal that gets ready to come through. But depending on where those animals' feet are, sometimes you can't open backwards, so you have to open front. When you open front, then you have to come back in and get ready to set for the next animal. Both systems work. It really comes down to personal preference there. Those are going to be the 2 most common setups in the industry today, is either going to be the side to side or the saloon door. When we think about some of our older head gates, we had kind of a V style, and we'll still see that V style on some of the hydraulics, where it's kind of fixed at the bottom and the top will open in and out in that V. One thing to be mindful of is that does limit the clearance of that animal. So they may have to kind of step up and then go out, and they may not have quite as much opening to go out. So that's something else to be mindful of. And this will vary. The side to sides tend to open up pretty wide. Some of the saloon doors open up pretty wide. Some of the saloon doors don't open up quite as wide. And that's something to be mindful of as you're letting that animal out. So they're not banging into the head gate as they're exiting the squeeze chute. So just make sure you're aware of that and look at that as you're comparing different models. A self-catch feature is one that gets talked about a lot, especially from an advertising standpoint. Both of the more common styles out there are set up where they have a self-catch feature. I will tell you, none of them are perfect. With all the self-catch features out there I've seen or used, you're going to end up missing some animals from time to time, so just be aware of that. I tend to be, when I'm working cattle, I'll disengage, especially on the side to side chutes. I won't ever set my self catch, and I'll just manually catch them there. On some of the saloon doors, most of them, the manual and the self catch kind of works at the same time there. So it's not that you're not setting anything; it's always set in that situation. Another thing you want to be mindful of when you're looking at squeeze chutes is how easy is it to open up the width of that chute or the width of that squeeze. And so with the preferred here, there's one lever you pull and lift it up, and you can see this gentleman is just using his foot to push it in, or when you lift it up, it'll naturally swing out if you want to swing it out. WW has a feature on the other side of this chute. I didn't find a good picture of that to open up the base. And with these, what you're doing is the top is what you're going to squeeze with. The base, you're going to set that. So if you're going to be working some replacement heifers, you're going to set it a little narrow. If you're going to be working your cows and bulls, you're going to set the base typically close to all the way as wide as it'll go or as wide as it'll go, and then the top a squeeze in and out. Some of the older chutes, the bottom of the base was a little harder to adjust, so just make sure you're aware of that if somebody's using one of those older designs. The other type of squeeze we have is what I would kind of call a vertical squeeze, where both the top and the bottom move at the same time. So you don't set anything. When you grab the handle and apply the squeeze, it'll go from as wide as it is to really narrow, all in one movement. There's pros and cons to that. One thing I've found when using some of these is if you're dealing with some cattle that are really wide at the hip, and maybe they're not as full that day, so the belly's not sticking out and those kind of things. Sometimes, it's going to stop at the widest point. So if the widest point is the hip on that animal, they may still have quite a bit of movement in there. Whereas if we look at the ones where we adjust the bottom of the base and then the top squeezes, we may be able to get a little better hold on some of those animals. That's really a personal preference thing. Some people really like this type of a squeeze. Some people really like that all in one motion, they can go as wide as or narrow as what they want. No right or wrong, no good or bad, comes down to personal preference. Another thing to be mindful of is location of the handles that you're going to be using, and what handles do you need to have your hands on at the same time. And so a lot of times we're thinking about, we're going to have our handle or one hand on whatever handle we're using to run the head gate, and another hand on the control for the rear gate. And so if we look at this chute, this gentleman has his left hand on the head gate, his right hand on the gate, the rear gate there. And then to get ready to squeeze, typically either take the hand off the head gate and reach up here to reach the squeeze, or take the hand off of the rear gate and reach up here and use a squeeze. I will tell you personally, when I'm using one of these head gates that just moves in and out side to side, I don't ever use the tailgate. We leave it right wide open because with this style of a head gate, if you have a cow falling directly behind this one, even if the one coming in from the back has her um, head and neck up close or even on the hip of the other one, as that one from the back is coming through, with this type of head gate, with a little practice, you can catch that next one no problem. And so I found leaving that rear gate open all the time actually keeps better flow coming. So those cattle will flow through a little easier. That's just a personal preference thing. When we talk about that saloon door style, typically you're going to want some gap between those animals. And so using that tailgate's a little more important in that situation. So with this particular chute, there's going to be three kind of handles that you're going to be, at least two, sometimes three handles you're going to be using. And that's going to be the head gate, the squeeze, and then the tailgate here. Another thing to keep in mind is where does that handle end up once you have that animal caught or squeezed? Does it move to a position where it's kind of out of your way? Or is it going to be left in a position that you may find cumbersome, that you're having to move around, or it kind of impedes your progress when you go down there to give an injection? And so that's something to look at. The other thing is realize preferences are going to vary between women and men and kids. And so just naturally thinking is, a young person's not going to have the reach of a full grown man, especially a taller man. A shorter man's not going to have the same reach as a taller one. When we're working together, I don't have the same reach as what my dad does. And so you need to think about who's ever going to be using this most, or if you're going to have a lot of different people using it, are those handholds and those reaches going to be comfortable for all people? This would be a Titan West, so this would be another option out there. So it's set up a little different. Again, it's a side-to-side head gate, and so this would be your head gate lever. Our squeeze is set up a little bit different here, so it's a handheld, so you actually pull that down and it's going to pull this lever, and that's going to be the squeeze. And then the rear gate is set up with a rope set up here. One nice thing about the ropes is if you're working by yourself and you're having trouble getting cattle to flow through, is you can open that tailgate and move to the side, or even kind of move hopefully towards the back of the animal and get them to move forward, and then drop that tailgate and let it go down. But those would be the hand setups, or the three main hand setups on this one. If we look at a Aeroquip chute, it's set up a little bit differently. So what the gentleman holding here on the left, that's the squeeze, okay? So it's down and he's actually squeezing that animal right now. On the right is going to be the head catch. So this one's actually designed, the head catch, you can slide it back and forth along this bar. And so you can put it in the more traditional position up by the head of the animal. You can put it back here by the rear of the animal. And if you want to get real fancy, I've seen one gentleman, he'll actually start it back here at the rear, and he'll kind of slide that handle forward as that animal's moving through the chute. And so he's closer to the front of the chute when he actually catches the head. Again, personal preference. I will tell you, most of us are used to having it up close to the head. So if you do have it back here by the back of the chute when you're catching that head, just realize your timing is going to be a little different. So it's going to take you a little time to get used to that. Nothing wrong with that, but that timing is a little different. So the head catch lever, you can slide back and forth. The squeeze lever is sitting here, kind of waist to chest high, depending on how tall you are. And then when we look at the rear gate, it's going to be a slide here, and I'll show you a better picture later for it. But with this one, you may or may not have one hand on more than one handle at a time. What I see more often is people will catch and then people will squeeze with this particular type of chute. Pearson's another one out there. So when we look at it, the handle for the head catch is a little harder to see here. But if you look right at the front where I'm kind of making a circle with my arrow, that's the handheld for the head gate. Now you grab it, it will swing up so that it's going to be perpendicular to that chute. But when you let go, it falls flat back to that pipe. When we look at the squeeze, again, it's set up on a rope setup, kind of like that Titan West we looked at earlier. The tailgate would be on a rope as well. The release for the head gate is that little red handle right there. Maybe a little hard to see, but that's the release. If we look at a WW setup, so handle for the head gate, so similar to the chute we just looked at, except it's always in a fixed position. Some people like that fixed position. Some people like what's dropped down. A lot of that tends to be what you started working with first. I will tell you, if you're going to need to be putting a halter on cattle and pulling them around, that fixed handle can be nice in that situation sometimes. We look at the squeeze right here in the middle, and then the tailgate's going to be set up with the rope set up there. If we look at a Powder River setup, so the gentleman's using the squeeze, or excuse me, the head gate catch right now. One thing that's a little bit different is you can see there's a bit of a gear setup. So that's something to keep in mind there. If we look at the squeeze here in the middle, it's going to be this long handle, and the tailgate's going to be the yellow grip furthest back. When we look at in Tartar locations of handles here, so again, for the head catch, it's one of those handles that kind of falls down flat here. For the squeeze, we're looking at the handle right here. And then the tailgate would be the handle right here. And the release for the head gate would be right there. Another thing to keep in mind is when you're standing right next to the chute, where are your feet going to be at? What are they going to be standing on? And is that something important to you? And some of the chutes, and especially when we look at some of the calf tables later, it may get a little cumbersome on where you're putting your feet. You may have to stand on some stuff that you didn't necessarily want to. Some of them are a little more flexible than that than others. When we look at this preferred here, when it's set into the widest position at the bottom for working cows and bulls, you notice they have trimmed some of the metal here so that when you walk in to give that injection, you're still standing on the ground and you're not actually standing on the platform of that chute. Now, if you're working some 4 or 5 weight calves and you have the bottom of this narrowed up, you may end up putting 1 foot on part of the base of that chute, or you may just keep it on the ground and reach in there and lean in. But that's something to pay attention to is how much stuff is going to be down there where your feet are going to be. Is it a nice flat surface, or are you going to have some bars or pipes or something you have to stand over? Okay, what are some other features and accessories when we look at manual chutes? So I kind of wanted to show you all of them are going to have a handle for the head gate, some way to apply the squeeze, some way to use the rear gate, and if it's a saloon door style, some way to release that head gate. But then there's a whole lot of other features we may see on chutes. So one of those to pay attention to is how's the neck access set up? So if we look at this one, you can see it has a door here that you could open. The top part of that door is open so you can slide in there. If you needed to get lower, you can remove a latch and open that up and have neck access there. If we look at this one, it's a little simpler design, but they took the main bar here and have it in a different shape so that you can reach in there and give a vaccine in that situation or give an injection in that situation. If we look at this particular chute, it doesn't have any built-in neck access, so you actually have to drop that first set of bars there to get your neck access if you're going to be given that injection on the backside of the head gate. And that brings up something else to consider is how do you want to catch those cows? And if you're going to be given, so the red chute there, um, this prefert here, this one's going to be depending, but if you're going to use this gap to give your injections, the way you want to catch that animal is catch their head or catch their neck. Typically, once you catch that neck, that animal will kind of pull back. When they pull back is when you want to squeeze them so that you have the base of the head right next to the chute. You don't want to have them with their neck way out there if you're going to be using one of these neck accesses. All right. If we're going to use some bars or one of these other head neck restraints in the minute, then we're going to catch that cow a little bit different. And you want the point of the shoulder to be right up next to that head gate when you squeeze in that situation. Okay. If we look at this one, it's kind of like the green one where it has a door that we can open up. The older models of these had a solid door. This newer model is solid on the bottom, open on the top. Side exit. So if you got a cow that doesn't want to go through the front end of the head gate, or depending on the type of head gate, you may want to let them out of the side, or if you get in a bind, you may need to let them out of the side. Some of the chutes, the side only opens part of the way, like it does on these two. Some of them, the side opens all the way up. So that's something to be mindful of. The other place where the side exit comes into play is if you're putting a cow in there and you're trying to get a calf to nurse or something, how much access you have from that side exit may be more or less important to you. So you can see on this one, that side door opens up quite a bit more. And there's some other applications where that comes into play, and we'll look at those a little bit later. So the rear gate, and we'll see some different styles here. So this one, I apologize, it's a little hard to see, but this was the best picture I could find. It moves in and out, okay? And so with this handle here that the gentleman has his hand on, moves in and out. You may be looking and say, well, there's a little gap there that if you were going to be working some calves or something, that may be a concern. This prefer is actually designed where there's a little pin that you can pull up here. And when you do, this door on the left will always stay in. And so the only door you're opening is the one on the right. And so it'll block that hole. So you can either open and close both doors at the same time, or you can disengage one door and only use the other door. If we look at this arrow quip design, so just one sliding door. And so if a person's on the opposite side, there's a handle for them to use. If you're working by yourself, there's this handle here that you can use, that it pulls that gate back across. A lot of the earlier designs typically had some kind of a drop gate here. This is one thing you need to be mindful of, and some of them still have this drop gate design. Absolutely nothing wrong with it, but there is something you want to look at. So the one on the left here actually has a pin. So when we drop it down, there's a spring-loaded pin that it goes in. So what that prevents is that cow coming in from the back, putting her head under this gate and lifting it up and coming forward when you don't want her to. When we look at some of the older designs, whether it's on this brand or another brand, there is no kind of pin or anything there. And so those cows can put their head in there and lift that up and come through. So that's something you have to be mindful of and be aware of, and just make sure you look at it. So side access, and specifically when we're talking about side access here, I'm talking about if you need to go in there and brand or something else, the access to the upper part of that animal. So we may see a door that opens up here, or we may see some type of a bar set up that we can drop various bars down, and work it that way. Most of the chutes don't have this anymore, but especially if you're looking at some of the older ones or you're thinking about buying somebody's used chute, you want to really pay attention. Is it this double bar setup here where those bars are connected by this U shape here, or is it individual single bars? And if it's individual single bars, you kind of got to be careful because when those fall, that individual bar, if you're standing in the wrong place, it hits you, it can kind of hurt and really stick in there, especially on some of the older designs had kind of a point to them. This, where we have both bars together and have this U shape, not near as big of a deal. If when it's coming down, it kind of grazes across you or something like that. So do be mindful of that, of the double bar setup versus the single bar setup. Another place is, what about bottom access to the lower portion of that animal? So if we look at this WW squeeze chute here, it's kind of a bifold here. So you pull this lever, it releases a pin, and half the door folds down. And so you can leave the bottom half in place with the top part folded down. Or if you choose to, you could slide the whole thing out and give you even more access there. If we look at the Preferred, it's all one panel that would pop a lever here and we pop a lever here and we drop it down and you can leave it in place like this lady has here, or you can lift it up and move it out of the way if you needed to. So different access depending on different designs. So when we look at some additional head and neck restraint options, so there are some bars that some of the chutes have that you can put on the front end. This is a personal preference deal here, so you can see this one. And so you may have caught it in that picture we looked at earlier. They were actually laying flat against the head gate, but after you get that animal caught, you can extend those to kind of extend that neck out. Or depending on the design, if it's like this, they're already extended when you catch that animal. So some people like this access to give an injection better than behind the head gate. Again, personal preference, and if you want to pay for that additional feature or not. Another way or another design that's used to restrain that animal is this chain setup here. I will tell you, I have used this before. It restrains the animal extremely well, much better than what you may expect if you had never done it. But what happens here is part of the chain goes over the nose. It goes through a loop here, comes back up and goes over the top of the head. And then there's a little hook. You hook it in there too. And so if you need to really restrain that animal's head, that can do a really good job of it. We're seeing on some of the chutes these days the options where they have this bar that will come down from the top and come in from the bottom and kind of hold the head and neck a little stiller there in that situation. Just another way to do it. Again, comes down to personal preference. Some of the chutes, we've seen this probably the last 10 to 12 years here that they've started adding in on some of them. And so if we look down here, you see these little red deals. What that is if you had a cow here and you really needed to get her in there tight, say you were going to be given some kind of IV infusion in the jugular vein, or you were going to be doing some cosmetic dehorning or something like that. And so once you got that animal caught, you wanted to keep her tight and really reduce movement, you could put a bar here. These are designed to set up where you move that ball forward, this will slide up, the bar will slide forward, and then once the bar goes past it, it automatically drops back to prevent that bar from going any further back. If you need to bar a lot of cattle, that feature could be pretty handy. In some situations, it may be a feature you rarely or never ever use. So it just kind of depends on your setup. This one gets real fancy where they have two different heights. This company on a lot of their chutes is just going to be one row of these bar holders here. A palpation gate or a palpation cage can be something that's handy as well. And so that may be an attachment that you put on the back of the squeeze chute, or it may be built in to part of the squeeze chute, depending on how you're set up. The other thing to be mindful of is, especially if it's attached to the squeeze chute, does it have a door on both sides? Having a door on both sides is handy if you need to go back and forth from side to side at times or other reasons. Another thing you can use these palpation doors for is if you're working calves and they get turned around, you can kind of open that door a little bit, let that calf back in there, and then as it gives them a little space, as they got that space, you can get them turned around and get them going forward, and then shut that palpation door to keep them from getting out. So that's another advantage. Obviously, if we're tail bleeding or palpating or AIing, that's a really handy feature as well. You'll see these chest rest in some chutes. Some people like them. I'll tell you personally, I think they're more trouble than what they're worth. They will reduce how well some cattle will want to flow through there. And then sometimes, even if those cows go down on their front legs, they may come to one side or the other side of that chest rest. So it doesn't always hold them up as well as what you may like. Again, some people like it. I kind of fall into that group. I would prefer not to have it and the chutes I'm working cattle in. And most of these are going to be removable where you can take them in or out. I mentioned portability earlier. So is it a situation where you're going to invest in one chute, but you want the ability to move it between a couple different locations? Or maybe you're in a situation where you're going to split the purchase cost between family members or neighbors. And so that's something to be aware of. And so, especially on a squeeze chute, they're a little harder to move around, but they can be moved around. But you definitely want to get one that's designed to be moved around and that's really easy to hook up and move down the road if you need to. I mentioned a clipping bar earlier, and for a lot of people, this won't be any kind of a concern that you're worried about. But if you're going to be clipping show calves, or if you're going to be clipping registered cattle for a sale, probably don't want to put them in a trim chute that you would use at a show because a lot of times we're dealing with cattle that aren't halter broke. So you want to put them in a regular squeeze chute, but you want access to them. And so some of these chutes that have doors that will swing way open may, and then have a bar set up that we can put in there to keep that animal in there, but then give us plenty of good access from a clipping standpoint. Or this also could be used again if you were trying to get that calf to nurse that cow. So that's what I wanted to talk about squeeze chutes. We'll go ahead and spend a little time talking about calf tables and then talk about some questions. So again, with calf tables, you can get manual or hydraulic options. There's not near as many hydraulic options available in comparison to the manual options as there are when we're talking about squeeze chutes. But there are a couple companies out there that make a hydraulic squeeze chute. So some specific things to consider with calf tables is will it have multiple uses? And this is things to look at when you're buying one, and also things to, is it worth buying one for your operation? So you use it for castration, you could use it for tagging newborn calves. If we're vaccinating calves when they're 2 to 3 months of age, that calf table can be pretty handy. When they get older than that, we probably want to put them in the squeeze chute. Branding. If we're branding at 2 to 3 months of age, that's something to think about. Safety considerations. If you have a calf table, you're not having to worry about trying to catch calves when they're a couple days old out in pasture, so you don't have to worry about the cows there. And that calf table can make it a whole lot easier to castrate those calves anywhere from about 2 to 90 days of age. We don't want to let them get any older than 90 before we castrate if we can. What kind of access does it provide for castration? How easy or hard is it to flip calves of varying weights? One thing to really pay attention here, and I apologize, I don't have a great picture for this later on, but some of the calf tables, they actually have a little foot stand that you put your foot on and push down to help you flip that table. Some of those are pretty high, and so for some people, that may not be the easiest or most comfortable thing to do. Depending on where your branding location is, what kind of access does it provide for that? how easy is it to move around the sides and front of that calf table? What size calves is it designed to hold? Does it have a back gate? So you'll see with some of these calf tables, some of them have back gates, some of them don't. That may or may not be important depending on where you're going to put it. If you're going to be putting it in front of a squeeze chute, you can typically use the head gate on the squeeze chute there. If you're going to be putting it somewhere else, that may be something that's a little more important for you. If it doesn't have a back gate, what you can do is just get an alley slide gate and put behind it if you need to. Is it reversible? Meaning, can you run it from the right side or the left side? How portable is it? Some of the calf tables are really easy to put in the back of a pickup and move around. Some of them have some frames that you can attach pretty quickly and move them around. Calf tables are something that can really make things easier for you, especially castrating and ear tagging those younger calves. So is it something where you could split the purchase with somebody else? So if you calve in the spring and you have a friend or neighbor that calves in the fall, you could use it half the year, they could use it half the year, and so you could split that cost. We'll look at some different brands here and kind of some of the handles that you would be using, just like we did with the squeeze chutes. So if we look at a pre-fruit, the way this is going to be designed is you got one handle here that calf comes through, you pull it back to you, and that's how you catch them. And then you'll move over here and you can grab anywhere along this bar to squeeze, and you'll pull that to you to squeeze it. You can also use that handle to flip over. This is one that doesn't have a tailgate on it. So you either have to use like this setup where they have a special alleyway, or get an alleyway with portable panels that you put a slide there, or put it in front of a squeeze chute where you can use that head gate. The flip on this one is unique compared to a lot of them out there. It's actually a two-stage flip. So you pull and it flips part of the way, and then you pull again and it flips the rest of the way. I will tell you, this tends to be one of the easier flipping calf tables out there. So if that's something important for you, this is one that can be a little easier to flip. This is one you may or may not have heard of, this brand. It's called a Lakeland. And these that are designed, when you see kind of the circular frame on the front and back, those tend to be really easy to flip. Typically, there's a little lever you release, and then it's kind of a gravity deal. You can grab it and pull it. And those typically will spin both ways. This one, the head catch is set up more like what we would see on a saloon door squeeze chute, and you'll see that a little bit better in another picture here in a minute. Let me back up real quick. So on the pre-fruit, your side access is you remove these individual bars. They're spring loaded. You pull down, you can pull it out and set it to the side, or some people will set it along this little, it makes a little tray here. You can set that, and then you can get in there and castrate however you need to, or vaccinate however you need to. With this one, you just pull this lever and this side will fall down. This one's kind of unique as far as castration access. You actually flip the bottom up here to get your castration access. Most of the time, if you're doing bigger calves, you may could pull this down and get access that way, depending on the size of the calf. This is showing that head catch a little bit better. So just like we talked about on some of the squeeze chutes earlier, you'd have your head catch here, then you would have your release that you needed to release. Squeeze is a little bit different on this one. This is actually the squeeze, so it squeezes from both sides in and out there. Foremost is another brand. Again, it kind of has the saloon door style head catch here, and then you're going to have a lever that you're going to release to let that animal out here. In this situation, it does have a rear gate on it. As far as squeezing them, the black candle here is used to squeeze and also aid in flipping. And then for access to castrate, you would flip one of these panels down to get your access there. This one also has, if you needed to get access to feet, you can open up the bottom here on some of those models. Some people, that'll become important, especially for people with sheep and goats. We look at a WW calf table. You typically recognize this one, even if it didn't have the brand or the paint was worn off on it based on the way it's set up. So the calf comes through here, and that's where their head is. And so there's a lever you can use to catch their head. And then there's going to be a lever that we use. You can see it better. I've opened it up on the bottom here. That's what you use for the squeeze, and that's what it holds that animal flat. And then you flip that table, and then this door on the side opens up so you have full access. So if you really want a tremendous amount of access, this one, from a castration standpoint, is probably the most wide open of any of them out there. Powder River is another design. So almost kind of has what we would call a V catch as far as a head catch goes. So you can see that lever there. We would have a lever to pull the squeeze, and then you can use that lever, or you can grab to help from a flip standpoint here. And then Filson is the last one I have in here. There's several others, but this would kind of represent most of the different designs out there, especially that we see in our area. Again, it's one of the ones with the frame where it'll typically flip either way. One thing you do have to look at and be aware of is with that kind of frame, some people find the access a little more restrictive there. So you have to be mindful of that. Again, one lever for the head gate, one lever for the squeeze, and then typically a foot lever to release it so that you can flip it. So hopefully that gives you some things to think about. Feel free to go ahead and unmute and ask any questions or put those in the chat box. Okay, question is, what is the average price? I'm going to give you a range rather than giving you an average because they will vary tremendously. And it's been a while since I've priced all of them out there, so price is still going up. I may be a little off, but the range will be pretty accurate here. When we look at some of the introductory ones that may be a little small for a lot of people, you're probably looking 3,000 to 3,500 there. To get into some of the ones that would fit more people, you're looking at 4,500 to 5,500. And if you look at some of the manual ones with all the bells and whistles, you're looking at $10,000 to $12,000 there. So we're kind of talking about a range from 3,000 to 12,000, but really you're probably wanting to look at least 4,500 to 5,500 to get one that you may enjoy using it and may have some of the more important features for you, and that will fit some of the bigger cattle. So another question that came in is, what's the economic life of a squeeze chute exposed fully to the weather? And so that's going to depend a little bit on the brand and how well it is painted. And so keep that in mind. But kind of think about any of your pins that are well painted. What's the life expectancy of your metal pins? Squeeze chutes would kind of be in that same realm. If it's done well, I don't see any reason why it couldn't last 20 years or longer. And somebody commented that they've had a chute since 1973. It's out in the weather and it's still holding up well in that situation. So that really goes back to how well was it made to begin with. Okay, another question that came in is, what maintenance should you do with the chute? And that really depends on the brand, and most of that's going to come with the head gate. So if we look at the Preferred head gate or the same head gates on the Titan West chutes, they have an infinite locking system here that slides up and down this bar, and it's pretty easy to move. And so, people who don't have as much strength, this is one feature they kind of like about this. From a maintenance standpoint, always check with the company and follow their recommendations. But on this one, they're going to recommend spraying this with WD-40 or something similar each time you get ready to use that chute. Don't put heavy oil on that. It'll mess up that locking system. But from there, WD-40, and then it would just be, I like to, after we get done working cattle, wash that squeeze chute out. If you leave that manure sitting in those squeeze chutes all the time, you'll rust those bottoms out a whole lot quicker. And especially the older ones that used to have wood bottoms in there, you'll rot those wood bottoms out real quick. So I'm going to wash it off. If it has something like this that I need to treat before I use it, I'll do that. And then it kind of comes down to touch up paint. Um, if we wear some paint off of it, is see if you can get some paint from the manufacturer and just keep that touched up, just to keep that rust down in that situation. If you're talking about like the saloon door style that has this cable set up on the head catch, maintenance is you got to check and make sure those nuts don't come loose and that that's working well. Otherwise, maintenance is going to be pretty similar across all the chutes. All right. Well, I'm not seeing anything additional come in. So thanks again for joining. Hopefully you found this helpful.